This is Adventure for Life. I'm Joel. Today we're going to do a synopsis of the 15,000 plus mile Grenadier cross-country trek. And when I started this trip and when I had the idea to do it, I really had 5 or 6 objectives. First was I wanted to drive from the far southeastern corner of the United States in Key West to the far northwestern corner of the U.S. in Dead Horse, Alaska. So that was objective number 1. Objective number 2 turned out to be driving across Canada, which I did. Objective number 3, see as much natural beauty as I could. So went and visited a bunch of national parks, and we'll cover each one of these objectives in detail in a second. Just wanted to see some unusual things. Trips I've taken before like this, you end up seeing stuff that's totally unexpected, and they add a lot of fun to the trip. I wanted to test the Grenadier out, and then finally, I wanted to eat some good food. That's the purpose for today's video, and we'll get into it. Okay, so let's go through those objectives in detail. And first, as far as the first objective being to drive from Key West to Dead Horse, Alaska. So you remember last year, if you were watching the Cutlass videos, I drove from the northeastern corner of the U.S. in Maine down to the southwestern corner of the United States in just southwest of San Diego. So this year I'm crossing the country, or the plan was to cross the country in the opposite diagonal. So I drove from the Atlanta area down to Key West, back up to the Atlanta area, all the way to Visalia, California, which was the gateway to Sequoia National Park. From there, I drove up to Salt Lake City, Utah, then on up to Edmonton, Alberta, and then to Dead Horse, Alaska via Fairbanks, Alaska. Then on the trip back, I drove back to Edmonton through Fairbanks, and then all the way from Edmonton to Montreal, back down into the U.S., into Maine, and down to the Atlanta area. So that was the entire trip, and again, 17,000, I think, in 57 miles, as I remember, was the total distance. Natural beauty. What kinds of things did I see? Well, I started off down in southern Florida, went to Dry Tortugas, went to Key Biscayne, and then did an airboat ride in the Everglades. Traveled across the southern part of the U.S. and spent a little time with my parents in Texas, and went up to some old stopping grounds, which is the Wichita Mountains in Oklahoma. Now it's just a state park, but still a cool place to go. Then from there, drove to Carlsbad Caverns. Fantastic, white sands. As I said on the video, a lot of white sand. And then Saguaro National Park, and there was the eastern version and the western version of Saguaro, and it's basically, saguaro cactuses. And if you remember, if you were watching those videos, it was hot, mid-July when I was doing that, actually early July. Then from there, drove to Death Valley, California, and hit 126 degrees Fahrenheit there, and then on to Sequoia National Park. Unfortunately missed Yosemite because of their scheduling issues, but maybe I'll catch that later. I drove up through, back up through Salt Lake City, and as you remember, I got my oil change and some service done and got my windshield replaced there for the first time. And then drove up through Idaho. And Idaho in general is a beautiful state, and I would say it's for sure underrated. You don't hear about Idaho, or at least I don't, much as a kind of tourist destination. But on this past trip, I went down through the Snake River, and the Snake River, I'm going to call it Canyon. and that was very beautiful. Drove to Jackson Hole, through Grand Teton, Yellowstone National Park, and honestly, I would say for the whole trip, Yellowstone was the most beautiful and most enjoyable thing that I did on the entire trip. Unfortunately, missed Glacier National Park. If I had seen it and known how close I was going to be to it when I originally planned the trip, I would have gone, but it just didn't work out. Drove through British Columbia in Canada, the Yukon Territories, drove up the Dalton Highway to Dead Horse, and that was just, you know, you'd have to see it. It's hard to describe. You know, it was 500 miles of up and 500 miles back of just beautiful mountains, wildlife, trees, just very, very beautiful country, and well worth the drive, and remote, very remote. And then did a couple of national parks in Canada. Honestly, I don't remember the names of them. As far as unusual things go, I saw the 40-foot leg lamp from A Christmas Story in Chickasha, Oklahoma. Saw the world's largest by volume tree, the General Sherman, in Sequoia National Park. Saw the largest beaver in the world in Beaver Lodge, Alberta, and then in that same place saw a big Snoopy and Red Baron display in that same town of Beaver Lodge. In Watson Lake, Yukon, they had the I'll call them telephone poles with signposts and license plates attached to them, and it was, you know, thousands of them, so that was pretty incredible. And then saw in Vegreville, Alberta, saw the world's largest Pasenka, which is the Ukrainian name for Easter egg. I believe there might have been a couple other things that I forgot about, but it was cool seeing those unusual things. One of the objectives, again, was to test out the Grenadier. And I'm going to do separate videos on what I'm getting ready to mention, but, you know, I wanted to see how the Grenadier operated mechanically, how the exterior held up, and then how things were on the interior. So again, the next 3 weeks, I'm going to do individual videos of each one of those three things and a review of each. And finally, wanted to eat some good food. So I did the diners, drive-ins and dives thing, as I've mentioned multiple times. Not every one of these restaurants were diners, drive-ins and dives restaurant. Most were. DJ's Clam Shack in Key West, very good. Sangich in Cuban food in Miami. Now that was not a DDD restaurant, but very good. The Alpine Steakhouse in Sarasota. Now that was one of my top two. I'm going to give it a tie with one that I'm going to mention later, but the Alpine Steakhouse in Sarasota, and I'm not even a big steak guy, but it was fantastic. The Mears Store in Mears, Oklahoma. So again, that's not a DDD place, but it was on the Food Network and some other, you know, publications or whatnot, and it's well worth visiting. In Tucson, Inca's Peruvian Cuisine, very good. My least favorite was in Bakersfield, California, Mama Roomba, and you'll remember me talking about that. In Salt Lake City, the Red Iguana Mexican food restaurant. In Jackson Hole, tied with the Alpine Steakhouse, Sidewinders in Jackson Hole, just a fantastic restaurant. Now down to the second worst was Roost Fried Chicken in Bozeman, Montana. Again, I'm glad we went there. Nothing to write home about. In Fairbanks, kind of the same story. The Hungry Robot was just a pizza place, and you know, it was okay. Had a interesting name, but other than that, nothing great. In Canada, and you guys may think I'm dumb for saying this, but you know, Canada's got a couple of chains that I was interested in eating at. One was Tim Hortons and one was Boston Pizza, and honestly, we found both of them to be quite good. A lot better than most of the fast food or quick service you're going to get in the United States. So Tim Hortons and Boston Pizza were enjoyable to go to in Canada. And then my last restaurant, and again, this was not a diners, drive-ins, and dives restaurant, but in Thomaston or South Thomaston, Maine, McClune's Lobster Shack. fantastic. Beautiful ocean view. You see the lobster boats out there and coming in, and the lobster was just fantastic. Anyway, that is the synopsis of the 15,000 plus mile Grenadier cross-country trek, and for the next 3 weeks we're going to do a review of various aspects of the Grenadier and its performance. Thanks for coming along.